Well, hello and welcome back to this short series on the spiritual disciplines. What's this series about? Well, basically it's an opportunity to use this time of isolation to be able to grow a little bit more spiritually so that when you leave this period of isolation, you will be better equipped to deal with the many challenges that you face ahead. Anyway, today I want to briefly focus on the spiritual discipline of fasting. Why fasting? Well, for one, it is Holy Week, the holiest week of the year, and fasting is a minor way to somehow identify with the sufferings of Christ and really to grow in your connection to God. But also you got to keep in mind that during this period of isolation, we've all experienced a little boredom, a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of moodiness. And speaking for myself, when I get in those type of experiencing those type of emotions, I tend to overindulge in some things that maybe I shouldn't be overindulging in, such as binging, watching movies or TV shows, or spending too much time on Facebook, or drinking some wine, or having too much food or snacks or that sort of thing. In fact, when I was writing this particular little series, I happened to walk by the candy jar, that had those chocolate covered kisses in it. Before I knew it, I had taken 4 of those kisses in less than 30 seconds. I had all 4 in my mouth. It's not that I was hungry, not that I needed it, but I was feeling a little bit anxious, and so I ate them because they were just there. I'm sure that every one of you can relate to that to some degree. Anyway, again, so fasting is an opportunity to identify with Christ. It's also an opportunity to reveal to us some of the things that have a little bit too much of a grip on us. But more importantly, what it is, it's a great tool to have to pull out of our spiritual toolbox, so to speak, in order to fight any particular spiritual battles that we have going on right now, which we know we do. There's a great story in the Gospel of Mark where this man had this demon-possessed boy. And the boy was, again, kind of out of control. The demon had taken away his speech. He threw him on the ground. The boy was foaming at the mouth, all sorts of things, just not in a good state. So out of frustration, the man took the boy to the disciples and said, please, cast this demon out of my son. And they tried. They prayed and prayed and prayed. Couldn't do it. So the man takes the little boy to Jesus and asks the same thing. Please, Father, or please, Jesus, take this demon from my boy. And sure enough, that's what Jesus did. Said a prayer, commanded that demon to come out. Demon popped out and never was to return again. Anyway, the disciples, were standing by watching this, and they approached Jesus shortly after, and they asked Jesus, what was the problem? Why were we not unable to cast that demon out? And Jesus says something very profound at that point. He says, this kind only comes out through prayer and fasting. This kind only comes out through prayer and fasting. Now keep in mind, Jesus was not trying to give some magical formula that we are to use every time we want something, want to get something from God that we really want. No, he is suggesting somehow that prayer and fasting together kind of increases the effectiveness of prayer. In other words, when you have this deep fellowship with God while being kind of separated, at least for a short time, from the world, you have an increased opportunity to have your prayers answered. Again, that this is an opportunity to strengthen your relationship with God while distancing yourself from the world. There's a man named Andrew Murray who wrote this book a long time ago called The Believer's School of Prayer. It's a great little book, and in one chapter he talks about prayer and fasting together. And I'd like to read a brief quote from him. He says, prayer is the one hand in which we grasp the invisible. Fasting is the hand in which we let loose and cast away the visible. Let me repeat that. Prayer is the one hand in which we grasp the invisible being God. Fasting is the hand in which we let loose and cast away the visible being the material things, the appetites, so to speak, of the world. And again, don't get me wrong, I don't think Murray's suggesting is that the worldly appetites, the God-given appetites, are wrong, but he's just saying that, sometimes if you really want to really see the effectiveness of your prayers or demonstrate the intensity of your prayers, it helps to couple prayer and fasting together. He goes on to talk about the idea that, there comes moments of intense desire, of intense prayer that you really want to get something, get an answer to prayer, and you don't want anything to hinder that prayer, those prayers whatsoever. And again, that's the time that you should couple together, prayer and fasting. And when I think about it, when I thought about it, there's probably never been a time in the history of the United States, or at least for a long time, where again there's an intensity of desire, to have this thing called COVID-19 just destroyed, gotten totally wiped out, because again it's pretty much taken over the whole world. And so again, what we need to do is be able to pull out all stops when we're fighting this particular battle, and many would suggest a spiritual battle. Pull out all stops to ensure that our prayers are answered. Again, to answer, to see the results happen, to see COVID-19 eradicated totally from this earth. Anyway, so again, that's one reason to really, or a few reasons to that I invite you to join me in prayer at some point, prayer and fasting at some point in this week. When I talk about fasting, I'm talking about generally fasting from food. There are other ways to fast I'll talk about in a few minutes, but generally from food. You might say, well, why food? Why is it so important to fast from food? Well, the reality is that when you think about it, our greatest connection to the world, our greatest connection to the earth is through food and really the enjoyment of it. It's the greatest connection that we have to the earth. Anyway, but I would also suggest that, a little fasting from food should be the thing you fast from. Like the other disciplines, you want to make sure that you kind of start slow and you don't overdo it. So I would recommend, as many people recommend, that you start with maybe one or possibly two meals that might be equivalent to a 24-hour fast. In other words, you may start out have your dinner on Friday night, but then breakfast Saturday, you don't eat, you fast from breakfast. You also fast from lunch that day, and then you eat a normal meal on Saturday night. You break your fast on Saturday night. And some of you may be thinking, well, I've got dietary restrictions, so I can't fast from food. I would say that's okay, but it doesn't mean you're off the hook, because there are a lot of things that you can fast from. For one, I would suggest that you need to fast from the news. I know a lot of us out there, including myself at times, are just preoccupied with the news on a daily basis. What's going on in the world? How many people are dying? How many people have gotten this virus? So one fast, a good fast, would be to fast from the news. It's going to help not only your spiritual health, but your mental health a little bit. Other ways you can fast is again through online movies such as Netflix, or possibly online gaming, or possibly wine or alcohol or desserts. Again, these are things that you can do that will help, again, to not only help you to connect closer to God, but maybe to reveal to things to you that have become kind of mini little idols in your life that you need to get rid of anyway, because they're competing with God. Anyway, so you want to take your fast and you want to couple it with prayer, because prayer's where you get that connection, that deep fellowship with God. In other words, don't just fast for the sake of fasting. Fast in order that you might be able to allow time to pray with God, to be connected with God, which means you may just schedule some prayer time during that 24-hour fast. And it doesn't have to be all 24 hours. It can be something as simple as 5 minutes every hour. Just set your timer on your iPhone or whatever to go off once an hour and just pray. Pray for 5 minutes. Maybe pray for the people that are on the front lines fighting the COVID virus. Maybe be praying for people who have been impacted by the virus or have had family members lost because of the virus. Or pray for our government, pray for the governors, pray for the president, pray for all the people that are trying to figure out the best ways to deal with this so people can go back to work and get back to their normal lives. And again, this week before, so the coming week, I've been reading about it, they say this is kind of going to be the hardest week, because we're reaching the apex of the virus, which means the highest point. They say it's just going to be a very, very sad week, where close to 500,000 people in the United States alone will be infected. That 15,000 people or so will die from the virus in the United States alone. And so again, they're making an appeal to stay in, to practice the social distancing, to stay away from grocery stores, to just stay in during this week in order to help level out that curve, so to speak. because it's going to be a very, very sad week in history. But as Christians, we know, as sad as this week was, or will be, there's no week, it cannot match the saddest week that ever occurred in history over 2,000 years ago, when Jesus Christ himself was crucified on a Roman cross. You know, we think about it, what sadder thing could occur but than the Son of God to be actually be crucified on a Roman cross? But as we know, God took the worst thing that ever happened to mankind and flipped it completely upside, and the worst thing became the best thing for mankind because it opened the door to salvation for all. And I really believe that as bad as this week is projected to be, that this can be one of the best weeks for Americans. It can be one of the best weeks for Christians because it can be an opportunity to push back evil, to push back this virus, to at least flatten it out. And also as an opportunity for people to begin to draw back, to draw into God. And in fact, some people would suggest that this will be the next great awakening. And they will do it, again, not simply by social distancing, not simply by hanging in the house and avoiding grocery stores and that sort of things, but they will do it because individually and collectively, we will all be united again to practice prayer and fasting. That's all for now. Have a great Easter and look forward to seeing you again next week.